All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's Title Topics webinar. These are ALTA's free presentations that we offer every month on issues important to title professionals. I'm Jeremy Yowie, ALTA's Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a great webinar. I'm sure while everyone's working hard to complete their budgets and marketing strategies for the 2017. It's also important to do some inventory on where you stand in regard to best practices compliance. And we did have nearly more than actually 850 people register for today's webinar. So there's definitely interest. It looks like we got almost 400 people logged in. So it looks like the other 400 are out doing some holiday shopping or maybe some happy hour or something. Just before starting, just need to touch on a few housekeeping items. I'll roll through these really quickly and then turn it over to the smart people. A copy of today's presentation was emailed earlier today to all registrants. You can download the PDF from the GoToWebinar window pane. If you're not logged into the webinar, just listening by audio, you can shoot me an email as well, and I can send you a copy after the webinar. And my email is jyohe@alta.org. All participant lines are muted for today's presentation. If you do have a question, submit them through the question box, and we will hold some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. As an added benefit, we are recording today's presentation, and after it's processed, it will be available on ALTA's website, and that the address is alta.org/title topics, and again, that's alta.org/title topics. I need to thank Fidelity for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars this year. Their support allows us to provide these educational opportunities free of charge. All right, so with that out of the way, let me briefly introduce today's speakers. First, we have Cynthia Blair. Cynthia is one of the founding members of the law firm Blair, Cato, Pickering, Casterline. Cynthia serves on ALTA's Board of Governors and is chair of our Abstractors and Title Insurance Agents Section Executive Committee. Also joining us today, we have Lori Dorman. Lori is Director of Risk Management for Agents National Title Insurance Company, and thought this was interesting. She is a certified fraud examiner. Both speakers have been deeply involved in the process to update and improve best practices, as well as the creation of tools to help implementation, and gave a similar presentation on this topic at ALTA 1 in October. And today they're going to provide some historical perspective to help you understand how the regulatory environment has evolved since way back in 1974 with the passage of RESPA to the creation of CFPB, who, as we all know, their main focus is to protect consumers. And then we'll dig into the bulletin the Bureau issued earlier this year on third-party service provider oversight, and discuss how that has opened the door for scalability. And we'll wrap up by providing a review of the changes to the best practices that went into effect in October, as well as the maturity model, which is a great tool to help companies benchmark their procedures against established standards. And just a reminder again to the PowerPoint that's available for download. You can also access some documents about the maturity model. There's an explainer document, and then a nice graphic that simplifies what the maturity model is all about. And with that, now that I've taken away 10 minutes of your life, I'll turn over the presentation to Lori and Cynthia.
Well, Jeremy, on behalf of Cynthia and myself, I want to thank you for this opportunity to be able to be a part of this presentation. It's been quite a great experience and an honor. As we go through the slides, Cynthia and I will kind of interact between each other as we each can put our little bit of tidbit information in on that particular slide. But I will warn you that I am from Columbia, Missouri. Cynthia is from Columbia, South Carolina, which makes us kind of like twins. so we sound alike. So if you have a hard time telling the difference, it'll be all right because the information is still all good. I kind of wanted to get to about the history of, in this case, title insurance, because I know for me personally, when everything came about with the, not necessarily Dodd-Frank, I mean that was quite a different change, but the CFPB and all of the rules and regulations that were established at that time, I felt a sense of fear, kind of a sense of being overwhelmed, and that unknown as far as what does this mean as far as, you know, my company, our agents, the industry as a whole. So I tried to kind of grasp my thoughts in a different manner. And what I did was I did a little research and I created a timeline. So Jeremy, if you can move to the next one. And although it does start in 1974, which is when RESPA became prevalent in our world, prior to that, actually title insurance began way back in 1853. But it wasn't until 1868 that a court case was settled from a dispute over a matter of ownership. And in this case, the search was completed and it was provided to an attorney for legal opinion. So after such was given, the transaction, of course, was completed. And as with that, we began the title insurance world as we know it. So from 1868 all the way to 1974, this is how we conducted business. Then, of course, we had our RESPA, and then in the 1980s, in or around, the settlement services changed, and the title agents began doing the closings as we know it today. And then we move another couple decades, and we have the GLBA Act that came into play. And then, of course, we went through the housing bubble, and then, of course, the evolvement of Dodd-Frank, and then into the CFPB. So once I put this into perspective for myself, it really made me understand that for over 150 years, title insurance as we did it was what we knew, and it didn't change. And there were a few little adjustments along the way, but other than that, you know, it made sense. But within the last few years, since particularly 2012, it's been one change after another change. And a lot of this information is kind of unknown as to what it means. So if you can go to the next slide, Jeremy. So now I understand why I'm freaking out. I mean, it made sense of all these emotions and different feelings that I was feeling as far as how change has affected me as an individual. And so I think I can safely assume, you know, a lot of other people within our industry across the United States. So I don't know if you guys have read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? I know it's a popular book. It's a really easy read, and I read it several years ago, and it made sense to me then. But our company just coincidentally tasked us all to read it again. And in this particular time, instead of reading it, I did it in an audio version. And from that, I had a different perspective on it, more so than I had the first time, and I think it's because of the effects that I've felt through the changes that we've had in our industry. Now, in this particular audio, the author, Spencer Johnson, spoke a little bit more into how the book came about and his different perspectives on how he developed it. But one of the comments that he made was about another author. His name is Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock. And this book was written in the 1970s. And in this, he made a statement that change would only accelerate. I thought, wow, how true was that? I mean, how did he know that that would be the case? And until I read that, or in this case, heard that statement, it really became relevant in reflection to how things are today, and not necessarily just in title insurance. I mean, I don't want to date myself, but as a child, we had a rotary phone and we had a party line. So that was quite a long time ago, and now most people don't even have home phone numbers anymore, or home lines anymore. And then as far as the cell phones, I mean, in 1997, I had my first bag phone, and I felt like I was 007. But now look at cell phones. I mean, the picture quality in each cell phone that comes out becomes better and better and better in comparison to just regular cameras. So the point is that, you know, change, it never seems natural or easy, but it's inevitable. And so you have to try to embrace it and encourage development. While change makes you, you have to be consciously aware of it, and then it makes that changing so much easier. So Cynthia, why don't you kind of give your perspective as how it relates to you and your business and how you've adjusted to this.
So this slide, it tells us really that we do need to gain perspective on this change. It is, you know, I remember when this all started, and my thought was deja vu all over again. You know, didn't we just go through changes in 2010? Of course, those changes, frankly, looking back, were really nothing to the extent of what we went through last year. But you know, you're thinking we just had to invest in new things and new training and all of this, and then it's time to do it again. And so you start to wonder, you know, you start to get, like you said, sort of freaking out, thinking, you know, how much more change is there going to be? Why is it so constant? How much is it going to cost me? You know, that's a big concern as a business owner. How much is this going to cost me? What is going to happen in my business that's going to change my, you know, my annual budget that I wasn't anticipating? The change is never easy, no matter, you know, even looking back again at 2010 and thinking that was really not too bad of a situation at all. But change is never easy, and we always like the status quo. It's, you know, we're not fearful of it. We know how it works. We know how our staff works, and so. But of course, you know, the thing to keep in mind is there's always change. You're never going to be in the status quo for very long. So you have to be. You have to analyze your business and consider what's positive, what's negative, as we know it today, not as, you know, not as what it was yesterday. And when you are thinking of these things and work and analyzing your business, you don't want to blame your surroundings. You don't want to blame, you know, you can blame CFPB, you can blame the Dodd-Frank legislation, but there's really no point. That's just a futile exercise. So you've got to stay focused on what you're doing, set your sights high, strive to achieve something, and make something good out of the change, which I think is really what we've come to with best practices. Hopefully, most of these things in best practices were things that many of us were doing. We may not have memorialized these things, but hopefully we were doing these things in our businesses. But what this has done is, best practices has really allowed us to memorialize these policies and procedures that we do and gain perspective on our business and really improve our business. So let's go to the next slide. Then we have the CFPB that is, of course, given us a completely new perspective and continues to do that as we look at enforcement actions, as we look at consent decrees and things like that. We see what we thought last week may not be the case this week. So we have to keep the CFPB in mind constantly so that we know where we are and what to expect in our business. All right, go into the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the CFPB. The CFPB is a really unique agency, and it's the only one that has it's been laser focused on consumers. You know, before the federal agencies were focused on safety and soundness of the financial institutions, but now they're focused on holding financial institutions and service providers accountable from a consumer focus, from that laser, and you know, this is something even new that these slides don't address. Regardless of your political leanings, everyone has to acknowledge that now, as we go into 2017, the new administration is likely to bring some additional change over and above what we knew of the CFPB or what we know of the CFPB today. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's not a good thing, and of course everybody's perspective on that could be different. But we certainly can expect that this administration is much more likely to do something different with the CFPB than had we had the other administration be elected. So we certainly will see some change, and it depends on what we what that change will be as to as to how we'll move forward with our businesses. The thing is, though, with best practices, we're going to continue to do that. So regardless of what happens with the CFPB, regardless of whether it changes its structure, whether Dodd-Frank goes away completely, and I'm not saying that I think that's going to happen, but regardless of what happens, the best practices of how we do our business needs to continue to be something we concentrate on, focus on, and continuously improve on. All right, let's go to the FireEye because we want to talk about security, and this is such an interesting thing. Jeremy, you're going to see if that map will come up. I think it will come up. This is the, let me see if it'll come up. Yep, okay. I hope everybody can see this. This is a real-time cyber threat map. And if you can see it, it's what is going on as we look at this, again, in real time. And you can notice if you look down at the bottom, the top 5 reported industries in the past 30 days, financial services is #1 by far. So we are, as we know, we are the primary target. We and financial institutions and everybody that services financial institutions are the primary target for cyber threat. So how we deal with cybersecurity going forward is such an important part to this. I'm always intrigued by this map. You can almost get kind of lost in it as you look and you see it go on. I think Jeremy was saying he was looking. Jeremy, how many attacks? Oh, I see. It's up at the top. Yeah, attacks today. Now I've got something blocking mine. I can't see, but I think it's over 466,000 attacks today, as of right now today, which is really just completely scary and alarming.
And if I could just kind of add on to that, Cynthia, when you were talking just in the slide previous about regardless of what happens with the CFPB, how valuable the best practices and the procedures that have been implemented due to that has really kind of awakened our world. Because prior to that, would we all have known or have started to react to situations such as what is taking place on this map right now? So I think it's the value in and of itself is priceless. So I would not, I mean, I'd put the CFPB aside and continue to go forward with all the valuable information that I think that ALTA has put forth for our industry to protect us for situations such as this one.
That's a great point, Lori, and I think that, you know, like you said, regardless if you take the CFPB out, if you don't even think about regulatory enforcement, but you think about how you conduct your business and how you would want, if you were a consumer transacting business with a company, how you would want them to protect any data that you have. I mean, we all shop online, we all do those kinds of things, and you always look, you're always told to look for the certain things on websites to know that they're secured, and you're supposed to look for that so that you reduce the threat to yourself of having your information stolen. Many of us have products like LifeLock and things like that we're all doing individually, and we want that so that we're protected. As companies who service consumers, we want to be able to protect consumers. So you're exactly right. We've just had a very, very heightened awareness, I think, because of the regulatory changes, but that's not a bad thing. These things are occurring, so our businesses, we only want them to improve in securing ourselves against threats like this, and so we protect our clients. Okay, next slide. Going into this, out of there, yes, third-party oversight. ALTA has been putting pressure on the Bureau for quite some time regarding more guidance of third-party oversight. The Board of Directors, Board of Governors has met with the Bureau, staff has met with the Bureau on multiple occasions. We have sent several letters to the CFPB, and we have asked the CFPB to give us more guidance on third-party oversight or vendor management. So the Bureau finally issued a bulletin, and the board was kind of tipped off in the summertime that something was going to come out. So we knew that they were going to issue something. We weren't sure how much it would be, how helpful it would be, and I think it was a little it was a step in the right direction. We were glad to get a response from the CFPB. It wasn't, of course, what we were hoping, which was a ringing endorsement of the best practices program, but it was the first time that the Bureau actually formally addressed the issue of scalability, and that was something that was very important since we have agent members of all sizes, and frankly the largest percentage of our agent members are of very small size. So the fact that the CFPB acknowledged that scalability is important and is something that should be taken into consideration, it was definitely a win for ALTA. The interesting thing, however, was that what the Bureau's bulletin said was that lenders' risk management program for service providers should be scalable depending on several factors. And they said size, of course, size, scope, complexity, importance, and then potential for consumer harm, the scalability of the potential for consumer harm. So that was an interesting perspective of the Bureau to have, an interesting response for them to submit. It was not quite exactly what ALTA had asked for in its letters, but again, what we felt like was a victory, or at least a small victory, by having a response from the Bureau regarding third-party oversight, something to get the conversation going, something to let everyone know in the industry that the Bureau was thinking about this and considering it. All right, next slide. So what will most lenders focus on? That's been a question that many of us have asked over the years since the best practices was first contemplated, is what will the lenders focus on? We feel like a one-size-fits-all approach is not what we will expect, and certainly it would be a very difficult thing for lenders to try to implement a one-size-fits-all approach to lender third-party oversight for lender-vendor management. We do know from lenders with whom we've met that the more they know about a vendor, the better. So they want more information, but I think it's a question of, how much is too much, and how much is just something they're going to ask for and then stick in a drawer. And most of the lenders we've talked to have said, well, we don't want that because that's not really helpful for us to just take a whole bunch of information in and then just stick it in the drawer and never analyze it, because that's not vendor management. None of the lenders that we're talking with and none of the agents that we're talking with are expecting perfection in the process, but everybody trying to move forward towards something that works for the industry, works for agents, works for lenders, and then also, most importantly, works for the consumer, such that the choice of settlement agent, settlement service provider by the consumer remains something that is viable. Certainly many state laws include that provision, and that it remains viable, and that remains something that the Bureau and the lenders understand is important, that the consumer really should be, in the cases where they can, able to choose their settlement service provider and utilize settlement service providers with whom they've done business for a number of years without concern that a lender may blacklist them or say that they can't be used within their vendor management program. All right, next slide. So that brings us to the best practices, which have been developed to provide assistance to lenders to satisfy this responsibility that was first underscored with the 2012 bulletin. Certainly, everybody knows by now that was not the first time that lenders were told that they were responsible for the actions of their third-party vendors, but it underscored that settlement service providers were contained in that group of settlement service providers. So if they ever thought that they were carved out, it was clarified for lenders that we were not, in fact, carved out of that responsibility. We hope and expect more lenders to incorporate best practices during 2017. I think with the bulletin that was most recently issued by the Bureau, and with more understanding, more education, more outreach by ALTA to the lending community, and to explain how best practices works. We expect that lenders more and more will incorporate some form of the best practices program into their vendor management programs during 2017. All right, next slide. let's see, this is slide, what? This is slide 15. I think we're going to move and let Lori talk a little bit about the best practices, the changes, the most recent changes that we had to the best practices in 2016.
Yes. And as, you know, as we move into what the changes are, as from the first release of the best practices, there was a lot of responses and input and questions about each of the different pillars and how they can be, you know, maybe worded different or embraced different categories that may not have originally been thought of. And so that's what we're getting into now as far as what some of those changes were. So under Pillar 2, the language requiring the use of the positive pay, the reverse positive pay, or the ACH transactions were modified. And kind of just a key into it, they had been talking to some of the lenders or some of the third-party providers who were doing the assessments on this and working through that, that ACH blocks and using of the word blocks really was not a correct terminology for the financial institutions. They like to term it more as controls. So that's part of the changes that was made into it, that blocks in and of itself was not meant to be utilized in that sense, but mainly that there's controls. Because there's a difference in an ACH between a push and a pull between the title agent and the financial institution. They do not want the outside world to be able to pull from an escrow account or an operating account or any account within your business, but you can push. And again, a lot of these controls should be worked with and discussed with your lenders to see what type of strengths and formats that they have in place to make sure that all the protections are available for you. Okay.
And Lori, to expand on that a little bit too, certainly in certain practices, certain companies, I know my own company has one particular lender that will only fund by ACH, and it's a federal government entity. So we know that we're not questioning that the money's going to be good, and they won't fund in any other way. We don't do very many transactions with them, but when we do, we have to be able to accept that ACH. But we have controls in place to allow for that ACH to be deposited in, and then the block, for lack of a better word, I know that's not the word, but the control to be put back in place so that the ACHs are no longer permitted without our permission. So I think this also contemplated the fact that in businesses and companies, there were sometimes needs for some of these, so it really was more that you had thought through the times when you might need some of these types of things, ACH, international wire, and that you'd place those controls into practice into your own company.
Right. Yeah, I think the word block really just kind of, embedded a thought that it just was totally not able to be used, whatsoever. And then as we evolved into the assessment procedures and the testing of it, and then the discussions again with the financial institutions and the different title agents, your point exactly, we were able to find that there were other aspects of it that needed to be used or had to be used, but again, as long as the controls were in place, that they should be safe. Okay, now we're going to move to Pillar 3, and the changes clarify the requirements associated with the maintaining and the disposing of your MPPI. Specifically, this portion of the best practices framework included the addition of some state law requirements for the maintenance and disposal of records, including electronic information that included the MPI. ALTA and the industry had heard some confusion that some believe the best practices required the disposal of records immediately after settlement. But this clarification makes it clear that a company may securely retain records containing MPI if there's a need to preserve records to meet that legal, regulatory, and/or business requirements. The amendment requires companies to establish a timeline for the disposing of records containing MPI to help protect against unauthorized access or use. Okay, the next change came into Pillar 4. Pillar 4 had to do with service providers that title agents may incorporate into their business with the notary publics specifically. So it added language in engaging these third-party signing professionals. The companies, the title agents, they had to follow their own due diligence to verify that those signing professionals had E&O coverage, a notary bond if it's required by that state law, to require that they furnish evidence of their current state licensure where it is required, or evidence that they have attained a recognized or a verifiable industry designation, and to provide an acknowledgement of compliance with company's instructions and company's information security program as it's detailed in Pillar 3 of the best practices. I want to note that if a third-party signing professional is directly employed by the title or settlement agent or the underwriter that provides evidence of compliance with the best practices, then that company doesn't need to perform any due diligence requirements as outlined in the section of the ALTA best practices. But if that third-party professional was contractually retained by, say, the buyer or the seller, then it's their responsibility to do the vetting of that particular third-party professional.
Hey, Lori, this is Jeremy, and actually, your last statement, I think, answered the question that came in from Stephanie, and her question was, as a title agent, you know, what's your responsibility for vetting a notary if, you know, the consumer makes the selection at their bank? You know, do you feel that the title agent's responsible for this vetting process?
No, it wouldn't be. I mean, I personally, if they have the opportunity to, you know, talk to them to say, you know, well, if you want to hire your, you know, a notary service, just to, you know, kind of give them some recommendations, but it wouldn't necessarily be the responsibility of the title agent if they did not hire that third-party signing professional.
All right, thank you. Had a related question. How about if it's a contracted abstractor? I'm guessing, again, a contract in place, though, with the title agent, then you're going to need to do the vetting with that abstractor.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and the next slide on Pillar 5. Okay, lastly, Pillar 5 changes, modifies the time frame under which the title agents must report their title insurance policies and remit premiums to their underwriter. And you'll be able to read it now as it's stated. I think there was, there needed to be some clarity in this particular section, again, as the third-party assessment procedures were done for title agents, whether it be done by a CPA or some of the other companies that are doing these particular vetting processes for the title agents. They were not necessarily able to meet some of the requirements, so they structured it so that it could be under certain categories. So 45 days following the date of settlement, the date the terms of the conditions of the title insurance commitment have been met. And again, as far as the title insurance premiums are remitted to the underwriter to meet applicable statutory, regulatory, and contractual obligations. So it made it a little more clear so that it fit into different categories that may apply as you're actually doing the assessments for this particular section. Okay, now we're going to get into the toolbox, and again, I'm hoping and/or we're hoping that as we proceed into what is available for title agents to be able to assess their best practices and to provide that lender with the information that they may need in order to have that vetting process complete. So the toolboxes that tools that we're going to offer in our toolbox are the ALTA Best Practices Assessment Procedures, the ALTA Best Practices Maturity Model, and the ALTA Best Practices Maturity Model Summary. Okay, we'll get into the maturity model. Cynthia, you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, a lot of times, even in the beginning when as a sitting on the executive committee, you know, I had asked the question. So I'm not exactly sure why is it called a maturity model and what is it? Well, so a maturity model is a business tool to measure a company's procedures against an established standard, like, of course, ALTA's best practices. And the term maturity refers to the strength of the procedures and whether they're followed consistently. So there are several levels to benchmark your maturity and where you are on that line of maturity. I had not heard of this, but it is apparently used in has been used for quite some time, many decades, in a number of industries, including technology. Many lenders use something like this, and in fact, the CFPB uses a maturity model in their compliance assessments. So why did ALTA create a best practices maturity model? Well, you know, we didn't want to just create a program and throw it out there and say, okay, here it is. We want to consistently look at it. We want to consistently analyze it to make sure it's fitting the needs of our members and to make sure that the tools for compliance are useful. So the workbooks, the assessment procedures, those were all very good. They're quite meaty, and from a management perspective, so I'm the owner of my company, from a management perspective, the way my brain works, they were a little tough. Doesn't mean that they were not good, but it just was, this is simply another type of tool, and the way my brain works, this visual representation of where my company is helps me a lot in managing what I need to do, what's left for me to do to reach the optimized performance in the compliance model. So that's really what the maturity model is, and now let's go into the specifics about how it works.
Yes, as Cynthia had described on the maturity model, it does give a lot of scalability, and I think that's the beauty of the creation of it, is that it's a maturity. I mean, you just see your growth, and I myself am a visual, so I like that opportunity of being able to see where I fit in a particular timeline, you know, per se, or category as it moves across, and watch the growth and or the progression of the plan to get to the section of optimized, which is the category is considered to be best practice compliant. And I think it's amazing, or it's good, or it felt good that once this maturity model was released by ALTA, that the information came out about the CFPB, and that the one-size-fits-all approach is not the expectation, whereas the other tool, or what it felt like, didn't seem to fit everybody. It was kind of a black and white type of grading, and in this case it doesn't seem or feel to be exactly as that, because you have that growing motion from the ad hoc to the optimized. So to get into what those mean, the ad hoc means that you're just starting. Your company hasn't yet established any policies or procedures. Then you have the planning, which means you're developing compliance. So there are controls and procedures that exist, but they're not documented. Or there's controls and procedures that are documented, but are not completely implemented. Defined means there's partial compliance. There's some controls and procedures that exist and are documented, but they're not completely followed. And then managed means there's substantial compliance. So there's controls and procedures that exist and are documented, but are not being followed consistently. And then, of course, optimized is full compliance. So controls, procedures exist, are documented, and are being followed consistently. And I kind of use, if you're thinking about your business or within your business, using your procedures on recording. So how you've developed and evolved in managing your policies and procedures and getting your recordings delivered within, say, the 2-day timeline that's set out by the best practices. So as you've evolved into that, you can kind of, in your mind, put yourself or see where you had fallen or started, whether it be starting with ad hoc to planning all the way into optimized. Okay, this next one is actually the maturity model. On the right, in the white lettering, is your best practice. And so that is actually the definition of the best practice within Pillar 1 for licensing. And then down below that is the licensings for your ALTA forms. We'll skip over related assessments just for now, but you've got your columns which says ad hoc, planning, defined, managed, and optimized. And you will see that you only have a category of ad hoc and optimized. So in this particular section, you either have licenses or you don't. So that's why there's no option to put in planning, defined, or managed. Now the related assessment procedures that are in blue, that's another set of tools, as referred to at the beginning, that will give you guidance as to what you're testing and what the description of that particular procedure looks like. And we'll get to a slide that kind of goes into a little more detail on that. Okay, this again is then pillar number 2, just to give you another kind of example of how the columns are utilized. Again, on the left is your best practice description, and in this particular example, we're just using a few of them. I'll just jump down to the middle. As far as escrow funds and operating accounts are separately maintained, and then escrow trust accounts are prepared with a trial balance listing all open files, escrow and escrow balances. Again, you have your related assessments procedures. Then you go into the ad hoc, which it's a description of what it says. So under the escrow funds and operating accounts that are separately maintained, you've got escrow and fiduciary funds are commingled with operating accounts. Then you move over to defined, which just separates the underwriter premiums and recording fees, because typically, as we have kind of worked with different agents, that's kind of the category where there's the challenges as far as the best practices related with recording account or recording fees and premiums being in the operating account. So in that particular category, it'd be under defined. And then, of course, when everything is separated and there's nothing commingled, you'd be in the optimized. Again, with the trial balances on the last category, says no escrow accounts or fiduciary accounts are prepared with a trial balance. Then you move into some accounts and fiduciary accounts are prepared with a trial balance. An example of this could be if you have, you're going to have your active escrow accounts that you're using. Of course, you're going to have a trial balance. But let's say you have a dormant account that you haven't used, or there's been no activity, and so you're looking at the, you get the bank statement in, and it may have, $50,000 some odd dollars in it, but you don't go ahead and run your report. So if anybody came in and they would want to see that the reconciled information for that particular dormant account, it doesn't have a trial, it doesn't have anything. Even though the activity, there's been no activity, you haven't identified any of the funds that were being held on behalf of the consumer. So it may fall into the planning category. And then the defined, which again talks about the underwriter premium and recording accounts being prepared without a trial balance, one or the other. And again, the managed, the same situation. And optimized, of course, means every single penny is identified within your escrow accounts and your underwriter premiums and your recording account. And again, the assessment procedures that are related to this particular category is what you can refer to as you're beginning your assessment procedures on your own, should this be the path that you choose to do. Okay, the next slide. Okay, this is the assessment procedures, and again, we're just putting them side by side so that you can see the different categories as it relates to the maturity model. Now, I know that this may seem like a lot, not so much mainly in Pillar 1, but Pillar 2 and possibly even Pillar 3. So I don't want anyone to feel like this is too overwhelming to be able to even attempt it. What I would ask, or at least recommend, is you reach out to other resources to give you guidance. So whether that be your underwriter who may have a program that can assist you with these procedures, and they'd be willing to give you some helping steps into how this testing works in order to know where you're going to fall within each of their categories. But I will also say that at ALTA 1, I spoke with the majority of the lead providers that offer services as far as the SSA 16, which I know smaller agents may not feel that they need to have that type or that level of assessment, but they do consulting engagements as well. I don't know necessarily the cost-wise of each of those, but I'm sure they're willing to work and discuss with you or be able to help you in order to utilize these tools to its maximum benefit in order to present to that lender your assessments of your own best practices procedures. And you can also visually feel confident of the outcome of the results of this particular testing.
Lori, that's a great point and a great segue to the next slide that I know you were going to discuss, but I wanted to bring up, when you talk about doing this and the task looking daunting, for some who feel that the cost of even a consulting company is simply not within their reach, I urge you to go through the maturity model and do a conservative, just be conservative about it. So err on the side of not quite as ready as you think you may be as you go through it, and then look at the summary, which is of course the slide we're on now. And it depends. It depends on how your brain works. So some people's brains may not interpret this in a way that's helpful to them, but a lot of people I think do. And when you have the summary and you see this visual, to me, it was a very useful tool. First of all, it made me feel like I wasn't as far off as I thought I was when I first did it. So that was encouraging, and it also, you could really sort of concentrate on, okay, if I'm at defined, managed, or optimized, maybe I'm gonna move those to the side, and I'm gonna look at anything that I said was ad hoc or planning, and I want to just concentrate on those for now. Or if I'm defined and managed, I want to concentrate on those two so I can get to myself to optimize on those and not the others. I just found it helped alleviate some of that feeling of being overwhelmed with it. I just can't. It's too much.
Right. No, that's a good point.
Sorry to hijack the slide, but
no, I'm glad you did. I love that. Again, as I had said earlier, I'm a visual, so I really like something such as this because it really lets you know where you're at. And again, this particular tool, and I caution you, and this has been kind of a discussion and not necessarily a debate, whether this should be handed out to lenders. But to use this as an example, say we're going to talk about the escrow trust accounts or the escrow funds and operating accounts that are separately maintained. Well, I know, from my experience in working with agents, that when agents have a lender order only, the lender sends one check. So they're only going to deposit the money into the operating account, and then they, from there, disperse it to the appropriate premiums, and in this case, it would be the underwriter premiums, to that account set aside for that particular underwriter. So in my mind, and this is something you can put in for the progress plan, if you have a procedure in place that you document every order that comes in, and you can track that particular premium all the way from the time it came in with the lender check all the way to the time that it goes to the premium account and then out from the premium account to the actual underwriter, and it is trackable, even though it did hit the operating, that would still fall in the defined category. So you can explain that as far as that is what your controls are in place. Now, this is the part you have to be careful, as the education that needs to take place between you and your lender to explain that this is the process or procedure that you have. Because if you don't, and a lender just sees that you have an X in defined, they may immediately think, well, they're not optimized, so we can't do business with them. So that's where it's really important to do the communication and the education, and or also it may be time that maybe you can think of other ways that you can do your order differently so that you can become optimized. Maybe it's a matter of when that comes in, instead of putting it in operating, you go ahead and create a file with the file number and put it in the escrow account, and then keep the premium in the escrow account and then take your portion out and put it in the operating. So it's the whole point is that this gives you that visual and that thought process to maybe think about how you can do it differently, and if you can't or you choose not to, that you're educating that lender to tell them why you have that procedure in place, because you don't want to not be able to do business with them just because you have an X in the defined category. All right, I think this is yours, Cynthia.
Yep. So just to kind of wrap up and summarize that maturity model, and you've seen some visuals of it, and we've talked about how you can use it in your own business as a tool to assess your level of compliance. You know, this slide really tells you that it identifies the strength of your own policies and procedures. You know, are they strong enough? Do they do what they're supposed to? And is everybody using them? So even if you have the policies and procedures, has your staff been fully trained, and are they consistently following the policies and procedures? You can measure that and see, you know, perhaps you've done all that you need to do, but you've got a staff member who's not consistently not following the policy and procedure. Well, you can really kind of see that on the maturity model and say, okay, this is my weak link. This is what I need to do. Additional training, or, you know, whatever it needs to be. So it measures that progress that you're making, and you know, you can, as you work on it and you move, okay, I'm moving from defined to managed, you get to see that, and then you can keep that visual. You can keep it up on your, you know, up on your computer screen. You can keep it up on your wall. However it helps you see your progress. It just gives you another way to determine where you are in the best practices journey, because it's really not a destination. It really is a journey. So it gives you that just another procedure, another way to manage your company's process and progress. So next slide. So everybody wants to know, it's the $10,000 or $100,000 question. What do lenders need? Well, there still is no one answer for that. The CFPB's bulletin did let us know that the Bureau at least understood the scalability, the need for scalability, the need to keep consumer choice in the mix. So lenders' needs are going to be different. You've just got to continue to talk about vendor management, or maybe not vendor. Maybe you don't say it in those terms. I know that because I spoke to a lender group earlier this year, and it was considerably earlier, so it was probably back in the late spring. And I asked them, is vendor management on your radar? And it was a small group in my state, and they all said no. Now, whether they were just the wrong people in the company, and whether they just didn't know because they're not in that side of things, and so it wasn't on their radar, or whether their companies really aren't talking about it yet. I don't know. I didn't know the answer to that. But we do know ALTA has been reaching out to lenders, trying to find the people in the compliance departments who can really be the ones to educate about the best practices program. You know, trying to get a little bit of consistency, because what we'd love to do away with is the 50,000 different ways of questionnaires and things that you get. I mean, there was a time earlier this year, and it slowed down a little bit, but there was a time earlier this year where I felt like I got a different questionnaire almost every other day. You know, some questionnaire to fill out, something to send in, and sometimes it was just, you know, one page of a few questions and send me your E&O, to something that was 25 or 30 pages of extensive questions and wanted documentation and all of that. So you would vary, and I spent a ton of time doing that. And even if you tried to, we saved them all, of course, so you could refer back. But even that, you still couldn't. It wasn't like you could really take what you'd done for one lender. They all have their own forms. They all have their own processes. So what we're trying to move away from as soon as we can is the tremendous diversity in what lenders need. But the only way we do that is by continuing to talk to them, by continuing to educate them on what best practices is, what it means for our members who are working towards or have achieved a level of compliance with the best practices, such that lenders can be confident that those settlement service providers are those with whom they should continue to do business. The last slide before we go to questions, or before we answer some questions maybe, is just really what a recap of what I was just talking about. You've got to evaluate your own particular market regarding this, what your own lenders are asking for. You ask them questions, see if you can get them to think about it, see if you can get them to tell you what they need. Educate them on best practices. If they don't know about it and they don't really know what they need to be doing, let them know about the best practices program. How well, I'm compliant with best practices. Oh, well, what is best practices? Well, there's 7 pillars, and here's what they are. And you can, educate your lenders on what this program is. Just be a proactive communicator about best practices and what you offer your lenders, your lender partners, as a settlement service, title and settlement service provider, for what you do in your business every day that will protect consumers and give the lenders a sense of ease.
I think that for me, if anything out of all of this, I mean, the tools in and of itself are so valuable, and they will give you a lot of direction, a lot of peace, once you dive into it and get an understanding. But if anything, it's just a matter of embracing the fact that this industry is changing. This industry should change because of the way the world is changing. And again, I think for us to be proactively communicating to the lenders and teaching them, I mean, we could create a best practices revolution. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. And then everybody's going to be proactively prepared for the future.
I agree.
All right, Lori and Cynthia, great information. Hopefully you were able to help clear the road a little bit for everyone on the call as far as, all the tools that are available, the maturity model. We do actually have several lenders on today's webinar who are learning about the best practices as well. Cynthia, maybe you could talk a little bit about that the maturity model is really an internal document to help the title agent, benchmark where they're at, and then maybe talk about, what tools are available for ALTA members then to provide to the lender to prove, compliance.
Sure. Yes, originally there was conversation about using the maturity model as something that you would promulgate or disseminate to your lenders, I guess. I think we've kind of moved away from that. It really is a management tool for company managers to use in assessing their progress along the continuum of best practice compliance. There are other things that can be provided by members to demonstrate compliance with best practices, and certainly if a member has gone through a SOC 1, SOC 2 audit, then they got that to provide. There are third-party assessments that can be done, and there's a certification package that is currently in use, although I believe that it's currently being reviewed by ALTA, but it exists out there now. It's a certification package, and it would be could be provided to lenders to show that the company has been certified by a third party for their compliance with best practices. There's also the ability to self-certify. So there's a self-certification that a member can conduct of themselves and fill out and complete if the lender is willing to accept the self-certification. There's also a compliance management report, and I know of a company, specifically of a company, I'm sure there are quite a few, quite many that have done this, but specifically one of my good friends has a title company in the Northeast, and she has used the compliance management report. It's customizable to her company, and it's what she provides to lenders when they ask to see evidence of her compliance with best practices. So there are several tools that exist that members, ALTA members, or just industry folks can use to demonstrate their level of compliance with the best practices.
All right, yeah, thank you, Cynthia. So there are plenty of options. Obviously title companies are dealing with a lot of different lenders and a lot of different expectations. So it can get murky out there as far as what title company in Ohio may need to provide to their different lenders. We are already a couple minutes past the hour. Lori and Cynthia, if you could hang out maybe another 5 minutes, we'll try and knock out a few more of these questions. Have had several come in, and Lori, chime in whenever you want. But this one's maybe more for Cynthia, since you are an attorney. And Kim was asking, if attorneys are treated differently under the CFPB, and say they might only have a law firm just one person, and they're saying, the attorney says, "Oh, I have my state bar." Does that card cover them, for not having any written procedures?
So I am, in full disclosure, I'm in South Carolina, which is an attorney state. We're one of the states, certainly, where attorneys, some attorneys, I won't say all, but some attorneys have that very belief. It is not my belief that that bar card would cover you. I mean, the pillars of best practices are quite clear in what they state. And regardless of whether a company, a law firm is, a small one-man law firm, whether it's a large law firm, whether it's a large title company, the pillars are still the pillars, and they're still asking you if you do these things in your business. Do you do them? And there are very few things that I can think of that are in the pillars that even a small one-man law firm should not be able to do. And again, it's on a scalable, it's on a scale. So, they're not going to have a massive audit of everything. They're not going to perhaps have huge IT departments and things like that. I am not a one-man law firm, but I'm a relatively small firm, and I don't have an IT department. I have separate IT consultants that we deal with, but that's how I manage this. And I certainly don't believe that my bar card covers me. I don't think that a lender would accept that, and I don't think that it would be something to fall back on should you have a breach in your information security or money stolen from your trust account. I don't think that your bar card is going to be something you're going to fall back on.
All right, thanks, Cynthia. Not a get out of jail free card. Interesting question, and Lori, this was back to the pillar and the change on third-party signing professionals and notaries, and not vetting them, if the title company isn't contracting with them. But so Courtney's question is, if their commission has expired, it can affect the mortgage having first lien status, causing problems for the insurance company. Are there issues there? I mean, who is going to be responsible for vetting that notary then?
Well, I mean, ultimately, if the title agent didn't vet that notary as far as making sure that they are, completely up to speed as far as the expiration, I mean, I've not heard or seen any types of outcomes for something like that, but the way that I'm understanding the layout is that ultimately it's the title agent's responsibility to vet their third-party notary signers, same as what the CFPB is laying out for lenders, that it's their responsibility to vet the title industry and the title agents, because they're choosing, to do business, with that particular client. So they need to make sure that they have their producer's license, if that should be applicable, or whatever the scenarios or their risk portfolio that they may have developed. It's the same, the same criteria. It's just in a different fashion. In this case, with the third-party signing professionals. Okay.
All right, Cynthia, you touched on this in the beginning with the Trump administration coming in, and Jeff is curious if maybe we'll be seeing lenders changing their direction, and whether or not they'll still be encouraging the adoption of best practices. Any personal thoughts that you may have on this?
Yeah, so nothing more than just personal thoughts. No direct insight into anything here, but personal thoughts on that are that no, I don't really think we will see tremendous change in what lenders will still be requiring. It's my personal belief that we will not see an abolishment of Dodd-Frank, and frankly, to think about the unraveling of that legislation, particularly after the significant investment that our industry has put into implementation of our particular part of that massive piece of legislation, is kind of frightening. And as much as many of us were not looking forward to the implementation, now that it has come and gone, again, I think the unraveling of it would be almost really worse than trying to just work within the parameters. What I do personally, again, I continue to interject that it's just a personal opinion. What I do think is more likely with the change in the administration is perhaps a change in this organizational structure of the Bureau, such to give it the accountability that most other federal agencies have. So I think that is a likely or more likely thing to occur, but I don't know that it will necessarily change significantly how the regulation works. And what lenders are still going to be. I mean, the bottom line is, the bulletin that came out in 2012 from the CFPB just reminded lenders, hey, lenders, look at all of these other bulletins that came out in the decade prior to this to tell you that you're responsible for this. So it's really just a reminder. Dodd-Frank and the CFPB didn't invent lender liability for third-party settlement service providers, and I don't think that we'll necessarily see a removal or a moving away of focus on consumer protection. That's, again, my personal opinion.
Yeah, and again, this is personally, but I'm just looking at it from the perspective of our industry, as we had stated in the presentation, that when the best practices came out, it felt overwhelming and all of the emotions and so on. But in the end, the value of the policies and procedures and the awareness was just outstanding, as far as the amazing information that you thought, oh gosh, I'm so glad that, now I'm doing daily clearing so I can catch those fraudulent checks. I've got email encryption because now we really know how much hacking is actually done on an account. So from that perspective, I'd like to think that lenders are also kind of looking at, now they've been introduced to the more of the idea of the third-party vetting and what that all entails, and the security that is involved with that when they're sending, millions of dollars to, title agents to disperse, like thinking, okay, wow, we need to have this in place in order to make sure that all of our funds are safe. So I'd like to think, regardless of the CFPB, that risk portfolio or risk management department and or criteria that they hopefully have established is going to stay the same, and so it's not going to evolve or be any different, going forward.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the best practices are good business practices to follow. And at the end of the day, we're all here to serve the consumer, the lender, the real estate agent, the title and settlement company, third-party signing professional if one is involved. And I think it behooves you to show to consumer X that you're going to protect their money, and you're going to handle and protect their data. And with more and more consumers being involved in the transaction, they're going to want to work with companies that can provide that security for them. And we are 10 minutes past the hour. We do have several other questions. We're going to have to call off the dogs. The contact information for Lori and Cynthia is on your screen. They will ignore your emails if you reach out. No, just kidding. But if you do have a follow-up question, feel free to reach out to them. Just as a reminder, if you did miss parts of today's webinar, or you think others in your office would benefit from listening, a recording of the presentation will be available for replay in a couple of days once we get it processed, and that will be available at alta.org/title topics. Looking ahead to January, our next free webinar will focus on the 2017 housing market, provide a little forecast there. Obviously, economists are adjusting their numbers with the Trump administration and the Federal Reserve raising the interest fund rate for only the second time in a decade yesterday. So we talk about housing trends, and we'll also have an expert from NAR who will be sharing some homebuyer trends as well to help you understand the type of title orders that will be coming in your door next year. And with that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. Cynthia and Lori, thank you again for the discussion on best practices. And I hope all the listeners found today's presentation useful. Take care, everyone, and be safe during the holiday.
Thank you.